July 1st, 1916. The morning the British Army believed victory was already guaranteed. For 7 straight days, the guns never stopped. 1.7 million artillery shells crashed into German lines across the Somme. Entire villages shook beneath the bombardment. The generals were certain nothing could have survived. Then the whistles blew. 120,000 British soldiers climbed from their trenches and walked directly into hell, because the Germans were still there, waiting, hidden deep inside reinforced bunkers beneath the shattered earth. And the moment the British advanced, the machine guns opened fire. Men fell instantly. Entire units disappeared within seconds. The battlefield became a storm of mud, smoke, steel, and blood. By sunset, 57,470 British soldiers were casualties. 19,240 were dead. 1 man killed every 4.4 seconds. It was the single bloodiest day in British military history, and the Battle of the Somme had only just begun. By 1916, the First World War had already consumed Europe for 2 years, and it had gone nowhere. Across the Western Front, a scar of trenches stretched from Belgium to Switzerland. Hundreds of miles of mud, wire, and death. The lines barely moved. Men fought for meters of ground, only to lose them again the following week. Entire generations were disappearing into the earth, and already, hundreds of thousands were dead, inside the trenches. Soldiers lived in conditions almost beyond imagination. Mud swallowed boots whole, rats fed on the dead. Rain flooded the trenches for weeks at a time. Disease spread constantly, and every day, artillery shells turned the landscape into hell. The generals needed a breakthrough. Then, in February 1916, Germany launched a massive offensive against the French fortress city of Verdun. Their goal was simple: bleed France dry. The battle became a slaughterhouse. Wave after wave of French soldiers were thrown into the fighting, and the casualties mounted faster than France could replace them. The French commander-in-chief, General Joseph Joffre, knew his army could not survive alone, so he turned to Britain. He needed the British to attack anywhere, anything that could force Germany to pull troops away from Verdun. The British agreed, and the place they chose was the Somme, a quiet stretch of northern France near the Somme River. No major offensive had been fought there before. The ground was untouched. At first, the plan was limited: a joint Anglo-French assault across a 60-mile front. French forces south of the river, British forces to the north. But the man commanding the British Army, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig, wanted something far bigger. Haig believed this battle could end the war itself. One enormous assault, one overwhelming breakthrough. The German lines would collapse. British cavalry would pour through the gap, and the war would finally be over. It was a vision built on confidence, optimism, and complete misunderstanding of modern warfare. Because the machine gun, barbed wire, and industrial artillery had changed war forever. And at the Somme, millions were about to learn that lesson in blood. The British plan was built in 2 stages. First, 7 days of uninterrupted artillery fire, a bombardment so massive, the generals believed it would erase the German army entirely. Every trench, every bunker, every machine gun, every strand of barbed wire, destroyed before a single British soldier ever left his trench. For 7 straight days, the guns thundered across the Somme. 1.7 million shells slammed into German positions. The earth never stopped shaking. Villages miles away rattled beneath the explosions. People in southern England could hear the bombardment across the channel. To the British officers watching from headquarters, it seemed impossible that anything could still be alive. Some genuinely believed not even rats could survive that level of destruction. But beneath the battlefield, the Germans were waiting. Deep underground, inside reinforced concrete bunkers the artillery could barely touch. Then came the mines. For weeks before the attack, Royal Engineers had tunneled silently beneath no man's land, digging through darkness, through mud, through collapsing earth, always listening for German miners digging toward them. 19 underground chambers were packed with explosives beneath the German front lines. The largest, the Loch Nagar mine, contained 60,000 pounds of ammonal. At exactly 7:20 a.m., July 1, 1916, detonated. The explosions tore open the earth itself. Fire erupted into the sky. Entire sections of battlefield vanished instantly. The blast was so powerful, it became the loudest man-made sound in human history up to that point. The shockwave was felt as far away as London, and the Loch Nagar crater, 90 meters wide, 20 meters deep, still scars the French countryside today. A permanent wound left by the Somme. 10 minutes later, the final orders arrived. Climb out of the trenches. Walk toward the German lines. Do not run. The enemy is already dead. Many soldiers believed it. Some were so confident of victory, they kicked footballs across no man's land as they advanced. Captain Wilfred Neville even promised prizes to whichever platoon reached the German trenches first with their football. Moments before the attack, he kicked the ball forward himself and led his men over the top. Seconds later, he was dead, and all across the Somme, thousands more were about to follow him. What happened next should not have been possible, but it was. The 7-day bombardment had failed. Not partially failed, catastrophically failed. Nearly 30% of the British shells never exploded at all. Faulty fuses, poor manufacturing. Entire artillery barrages buried themselves harmlessly in the mud, and many of the shells that did explode missed their targets completely. The barbed wire remained intact. Thick tangled walls of steel stretched across no man's land exactly where the British soldiers needed to advance. But the greatest failure lay underground, because the German army was still alive. The dugouts on the Somme were not simple trenches. They were underground fortresses. Some reached 12 meters beneath the earth, protected by reinforced timber, steel beams, concrete, built specifically to survive massive artillery bombardment. And they worked. When the British mines exploded, and the whistles finally blew, the German soldiers climbed calmly from their bunkers. They carried Maxim machine guns into position, loaded ammunition belts, and waited. Then the British appeared through the smoke, walking forward in straight lines, exactly as ordered. Heavy packs, rifles, bayonets fixed, thousands of men advancing directly into concentrated machine gun fire. Then, the guns opened fire, and the lines collapsed. Entire rows of soldiers vanished in seconds. In some sectors, whole battalions were destroyed almost instantly. The Accrington Pals Battalion, 720 men from the same small Lancashire town, had enlisted together, trained together, laughed together, and advanced together into the Somme. Within 30 minutes, 584 were casualties. Entire streets back home lost nearly every young man they had. The Newfoundland Regiment suffered even worse. 801 men advanced across no man's land. 710 were killed or wounded. Some battalions never even reached the German wire. Many did not make it 20 meters from their own trenches. British officers later described watching entire lines of men collapse, like dominoes, as machine gun fire swept across the battlefield. By the end of July 1, 1916, the British Army had suffered 57,470 casualties, 19,240 dead. In a single day, one soldier killed every 4.4 seconds, which means, in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, dozens of men were already dead. And after all of it, in most sectors, the British front line had barely moved at all. But the generals did not stop the attack, because the Battle of the Somme was only beginning. Most people remember July 1, 1916, the first day of the Somme, the slaughter, the catastrophe. But far fewer remember what came after. Because the battle did not end that evening, it continued for 141 days, from July to November. 5 months of relentless industrial warfare across the same shattered fields of northern France. Every village, every trench, every hill, fought over again, and again, and again. The summer heat slowly disappeared beneath endless autumn rain. The battlefield collapsed into mud. Not ordinary mud. A thick black swamp created by millions of artillery shells tearing apart the earth itself. Men disappeared into it. Some drowned inside flooded shell craters, unable to climb back out while carrying heavy equipment. Horses vanished beneath the mud. Artillery sank into the ground. The Somme no longer looked like France. It looked like another planet, A dead world of craters, smoke, and shattered trees. Then, on September 15, 1916, the battlefield changed forever. Because that morning, the British unleashed a weapon the world had never seen before. Tanks. 32 Mark I armored vehicles crawled slowly across the Somme battlefield. Steel monsters emerging through smoke and mud. They were primitive machines. Slow, unreliable, barely capable of moving faster than walking speed. Many broke down before reaching the German lines. Others became trapped in shell craters. But the tanks that kept moving terrified everyone who saw them. German soldiers stared in disbelief as giant armored machines rolled directly over trenches, crushed barbed wire beneath steel tracks, and absorbed machine gun fire that would have killed entire waves of infantry. To the men watching in 1916, it looked like the future itself had arrived on the battlefield. General Douglas Haig saw the potential immediately. He ordered hundreds more tanks into production, and from that moment forward, warfare would never be the same again. But hidden among the millions of soldiers fighting at the Somme was one man history would never forget. In October 1916, a 27-year-old German corporal served near the front as a dispatch runner, one of the deadliest jobs in the war, carrying messages through artillery fire, across shattered trenches, through machine gun fire and explosions. On October 7th, a British shell exploded near his position. Shrapnel tore into his thigh. He collapsed and was evacuated from the battlefield. The wound saved his life. He spent the rest of the year recovering in hospital. His name was Adolf Hitler, and history would turn on that moment. Because if that shell had landed only a few feet closer, the 20th century might have unfolded entirely differently. No Nazi Germany, no Holocaust, no Second World War. Tens of millions of lives hanging on inches of battlefield steel buried in the mud of the Somme. When the Battle of the Somme finally ended, on November 18, 1916, the British and French surveyed what they had gained. 7 miles. After 141 days of continuous combat, millions of artillery shells, and more than 1 million casualties, the Allied advance had reached a maximum depth of just 7 miles. 7 miles of shattered French farmland. The cost was almost beyond comprehension. The British Army suffered over 419,000 casualties, more than 127,000 dead. The French lost another 204,000 men, and the Germans, an estimated 500,000. Combined, more than 1 million human beings killed or wounded, for 7 miles of mud. Back in Britain, the truth arrived slowly. The military tightly controlled what newspapers could report from the front. But there was one thing they could not hide: the telegrams. They arrived day after day, street after street, door after door. Black letters announcing death to families across the country. The Accrington Pals became a symbol of the disaster. 720 men from the same town had enlisted together, and in a single morning, hundreds were gone. Entire neighborhoods lost their young men at once. Brothers, sons, fathers, friends. The grief was not private anymore. It belonged to entire communities. Some towns in Britain never fully recovered from the losses suffered at the Somme. Then, in August 1916, while the battle still raged, Britain witnessed something unprecedented. The world's first feature-length war documentary, filmed during the Battle of the Somme itself. 20 million people watched it in British cinemas, half the population of the country. For many, it was the first time they had truly seen modern industrial warfare. Not paintings, not newspaper sketches. Reality. Mud-covered soldiers stumbling through shellfire, stretchers carrying broken bodies, men collapsing beneath explosions. Some scenes were staged, most were not. Audiences sat in silence. Many wept openly. Some walked out before the film ended, because for the first time, ordinary civilians could see what was happening across the channel. And once they saw it, war could never again be imagined as glorious. The Somme changed Britain forever, but history remains divided on what the battle truly achieved. Because the Somme was not only a failure, though it was undeniably one. The German army emerged from the battle deeply weakened. Its experienced pre-war soldiers, its veteran units, its best officers and non-commissioned leaders had been slowly destroyed in months of attritional warfare. The pressure on Verdun was relieved. France survived. And the British Army that fought in 1917 and 1918 was no longer the same inexperienced force that had marched in straight lines into machine gun fire on July 1st. It became more flexible, more disciplined, more deadly. The lessons of modern warfare had finally been learned, but those lessons came at a cost so enormous, so horrifying, that even today, the numbers barely feel real. The Somme became a symbol of industrialized death, a battle where human life was consumed at a scale the world had never seen before. And across the fields of northern France, the scars are still there.